Hi everyone, Neil here again. So today I'm going to talk about CPUs and performance for Azure Virtual Desktop. So it's probably one of the most important things you can choose when you're designing and implementing your Azure Virtual Desktop solution, because number one, your CPU selection affects cost, and number two, affects performance. Right. So obviously, when we're producing or delivering Azure Virtual Desktop projects, we want the users to have a good experience, but we also want the cost to be manageable, right? I've seen many AVD projects fail because either the user performance wasn't good enough or because it's just too expensive. Okay, so we need to make sure that we get the right mix and balance between sort of cost and performance. So I'm just going to quickly explain the different types of VMs that you can use, and also how we can basically quickly work out what we need. Okay, it's very much depending upon your workload. Most people have a generic workload where they're going to like Teams, Office, for example, a few browsers open. That's the most use cases that we see. But obviously we have those specific requirements where a customer may have a simple GPU intensive application, or they may have a very complicated spreadsheet, or they may have something which they need to do which requires a lot of memory or IOPS, or it needs lots of CPU. So the good thing about Azure is you can really fine tune it to your customer's needs, right? I don't have to worry about have I picked the right spec VM, have I picked the right spec sort of physical hardware, because I can easily just swap and change it for something else. So what we're going to do today is we're just going to show you, quickly walk through some of the different options which you can have. Okay, so what you can have here is we can have general use, which is what we call the D-series. Okay, and what we talk about general use is your basically ratio of CPU to memory. Okay, so general use is your average. That's normally that's the starting point of where you're picking your VMs. And if we pick that, we can see most of these are D-series VMs. Okay, and we're actually going to show you the cost of those as well. So this is the cost per hour. And what these generally work out as, so D is the series, 2 is the number of CPUs in that host. Okay, and then AS is normally whether it supports premium SSD or not, and whether it's an AMD or whether it's an Intel. Okay, so that is general consensus that you work off. And then the V is a series of VM. Okay, so just like anything, these are physical hardware kit within inside the Azure data center, and these are the generation of the processors, right? So most customers either use V3, V4, or V5. Just a little tip for you. Quite a common use, an easy way to get extra performance for no extra cost is to basically, if you're using V3 VMs, you want to resize those to V5s, okay? Because you get extra performance for pretty much the same cost, sometimes cheaper. Just beware there is an issue going from V3 to V4 or V5, because the temp dislocation change, so it can cause problems when you're trying to change the VM. So sometimes to go from a V3 to V5, you have to re-image the VM or delete and recreate it. So that's general use VMs. That's going to fit most scenarios. What we see from a user capacity point of view is, again, it depends on the workload, but I always start off on what we call a ratio. So the ratio is your vCPU to user ratio, and that's the amount of users to vCPU. Okay, so normally I use a 2-to-1. Personally, I think that's what we get the best performance bang for most customers. Obviously, it depends on the application, but 2-to-1. And that means 2 users to 1 CPU. So let's pick an example. So if I want to pick this D16 ASV5, I'm going to say that may potentially fit 32 users onto the host, because it's a D16, 2-to-1, 16 times 2 equals 32 users. Okay, therefore I'm getting 64 gigs of RAM as well. So we need to work out how much RAM is going to be per user for that. Okay, normally an average desktop between 2 and 3 gig per user you're going to use. Okay, so that's a D series. And then let's look at the other one. So we can look at RAM optimized VMs as well, right? And this is where the ratio is higher for the RAM. So it's a lower CPU to higher RAM ratio. So if you've got RAM intensive applications, then this is one that you want to go for. Interestingly, generally we see better performance from these VMs. A lot of customers have reported random issues with the D-series VMs where they'll get to a tipping point and then for absolutely zero reason they'll just become really slow and sluggish. Even though you look at the memory usage, even look at the CPU usage, it all looks okay, but the user's having a really bad experience. We don't seem to get that on the E-series. Whether that's something to do with the architecture and stuff, I don't know. So again, we can look at these scenarios and say, right, okay, E16, let's double that to 32 users, and then we can see that's got like 16 cores, but it's got 128 gigs of RAM instead of like 64 gigs of RAM. Okay, so use this if you are having memory intensive applications and you find that your host is running out of memory. Okay. The other ones that we want to look at are the CPU optimized. So these are what we call our F-series VMs. And again, we're going to optimize the CPU compared to the memory. Okay, so if you see previously, that would have been like 16 cores to, 64 gigs of RAM. Now we've got 16 cores to 32 gigs of RAM, for example. So use this if you want to have CPU intensive applications, but be careful because these are quite expensive. Okay. Again, we're going to show you the cost here within Nadio. So we can look at these and say, right, okay, we can pick these if you've got the CPU intensive applications. And the other one, which I'm not going to go into a lot of detail today, is probably a separate subject all on its own, is GPU VMs. Okay, so here we can pick our GPU VM types, and we can see the cost of those as well. Okay, so I hope this was useful. Again, I'm going to repeat it. Picking your VM types is critical to your cost on your performance. So please make sure you analyze your environment. Look where what the limiting factor is. Is it CPU? Is it memory? Is it disk IOPS? There's a lot which goes into a planning host. But I mean, the good thing is as well, if we wanted to change the hosts, right, it's dead easy. All I have to do is go into Nadio. I could just go to here and I want to resize, re-image, and if I want to change to a different image, for example, if I wanted to go to VM size, and I'll change that to, a D64, let's pick that, click run now, save and close, and it's done. Okay, so it makes it very, very easy to swap and change, but it's good to have so much flexibility that you can fine tune it, right? I can have 1 week running a D16, and I can have next week running a D8, and just see how our users are responding to that. But again, the critical thing is analyze your workload. Each workload is different, right? So the key is to get in the right spec VM to the users who are using it, and make sure you're getting that workload sizing right. Okay. See you tomorrow for another subject, which I don't know what it'll be yet. I just think of these randomly in my head. It depends on customer conversations that I'm having throughout the day as well. Okay. Thank you. Goodbye.